Hello everyone and welcome to every episode of Family Guy Season 22 Reviewed. This will be a shorter outing, a quarter shorter in fact. This season only contains 15 episodes, instead of the usual 20. This was due to the Writers Guild of America strike which was happening at the time. Steph and many others who work on the show were involved. I don't mind either way. The last few seasons have been tolerable, so I wasn't begging for a break, but anything which helps me move to the end of this series quicker, I guess is a good thing. Without further ado, let's move into these episodes with Season 22, Episode 1, Fertilized Meg. Meg agrees to be Bruce and Jeffrey's surrogate, but she becomes attached to the baby herself. My best cutaway here was the Griffin's ancestor who took part in the Boston Tea Party, but was hesitant to throw out the tea. My best moment was Stewie losing the rather anticlimactic game of bowling to the rival baby William. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. This is one of those template-like Family Guy episodes, which felt thrown together and lazy. Meg actually having a baby is something which feels a bit off to me. Just given the history of the show, isn't that something they used to joke about in the early seasons? It doesn't help that nothing came from it. She finally agrees to fulfill her end of the bargain and give the baby to Bruce and his partner, but this will almost certainly, hardly if ever, be mentioned again. This all ends up creating a pointless feel for the episode. Even the characters here felt lacking in energy and charisma. As I said, the only decent moment was Stewie's game of bowling, where they had the ramps up at either side, and all either of them can manage is the ball just grazing a pin and having it pathetically topple over. I hope they put things right for next episode, which is Episode 2, Supermarket Pete. Lois gets annoyed when Peter takes a new job at her favourite supermarket. Meanwhile, Joe and Brian try to write a crime story. My best cutaway was the grocery store Oscars. My best moment was Peter disappearing into the mist at the supermarket. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This is one of those episodes which has some interesting things going on, but was held back by me not finding it funny. Peter getting a job at a supermarket did feel a bit convenient to get in Lois's way, but it did once again expose her sadness and pettiness. Her getting banned from the store for yelling at an employee was technically right, even if she got let back in at the end, in exchange for Peter getting fired. The subplot was a nice Joe and Brian pair up. They work quite well together, to be honest, and it's just an underutilized pairing on the show. Their behaviour writing a book based on this cold case may be sketchy, especially going through confidential police records and questioning the victim's parents at their home. That was very immoral behaviour. But as the ending makes clear, it's all to make fun of how exploitative some crime shows and podcasts can be. Still, that ending was a bit underwhelming. I wish we got to find out more details about the unsolved murder. A final thing to note about this is the complete absence of Stewie in this episode. A very rare thing for this show. It's just so noticeable not to have him at least butting in with a few wisecracks. Episode 3, A Stache from the Past. Peter goes with Mayor Wild West to New York City. Meanwhile, Stewie and Brian start doing flea markets and make a ton of money. My best cutaway was Prince Harry and Meghan Markle at the pool. My best moment was Stewie trying to barter people into buying all the junk. This one gets a 2 out of 5. They really are milking the Mayor West character for all it's worth lately, and I don't think it's working out for them. I didn't mind the character at first, but the more they push him, the more I'm starting to realise that he just isn't very funny, and I find myself drifting out of whatever plot lines he's in because of his bland voice and personality. I did pay slightly more attention to the Stewie-Brian subplot. Stewie trying to teach Brian how to get people to pay over the odds for junk they don't really need was decent. That type of trickery fits him quite well. We also got to see Bruce again, in a rivalry with them, at the flea market. He's also appearing a lot lately. I assume just to give Mike Henry something to do, since he no longer voices Cleveland, and they seem to have written Consuela and Herbert out of the show. Voice actor speculation aside, this was another mediocre effort. Episode 4, Old World Harm. Peter and Lois vacation in Florida, where they become the target of organ-hungry, old people. Also, Stewie and Brian try to conquer their fear of the shower. My best cutaway here was the ending gag, with Joe stealing Cleveland's legs. My best moment overall was the organ room door signs. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. There were too many continuity errors here for me to enjoy this. I can accept a certain level of ignoring continuity, but it's too much to be changing Brian's entire backstory, that he was already a pup living with the Griffins, instead of Peter taking him in off the street. Also, he has been fine with showers before, so I don't know why he's so concerned about it here. The scene in the bath with Stewie and Brian was weird as hell. The almost action-like scenes underwater with Stewie were decent, but there were some awkward moments too, like Stewie complimenting Brian's penis, and wanting him to say something about his. Trust Stewie to make things weird. Peter, Lois and their organs being the target of seniors was okay. The scenes at the hotel were full of fairly standard old people jokes, but them having to escape at least brought the smallest bit of drama. And as I say, I did like the misleading door label, and then the totally obvious one next to it, specifically stating this is where we keep stolen body parts. Unfortunately, I just couldn't get past all the Brian stuff. Episode 5, Baby It's Cold Inside. Peter forgets his anniversary, so tries to find a way to make it up to Lois. Meanwhile, Stewie gets a mini fridge for his room. My best cutaway here was Peter repeatedly being whipped during a BDSM act because he can't remember the safe word. My best moment here was the ending. I gave it a 3 out of 5. This was okay, better than the last two at least. Peter and Lois' marriage drama is nothing new. I'm pretty sure Peter might have even forgotten their anniversary before. Correct me if I'm remembering wrong, but I swear that was a plot point before. Regardless, Lois getting annoyed at him for not being the man in the relationship and protecting her from a shark was something new. I can kind of see both sides of that argument, but of course Peter is the one treated fully in the wrong, and he tries and fails to make it up to Lois all episode. The ending, despite being a setup by Peter to get Lois back on side, I kind of liked, just because of how crazy Lois went, punching the shark, and going all demon in the sack mode on Peter. Lois embracing her freaky side is the best thing about the character nowadays. The subplot was also decent. Nothing much came of it, but Stewie getting this mini fridge ahead of Danny DeVito and turning into this college party type of guy was mildly entertaining, even if the ending was a bizarre, kind of outdated Shining reference. There were a few jokes here I liked, of course the DeVito reference, and Quagmire going, "I follow your wife," to which Peter responds, "You mean on Instagram?" Yep. I'm sure that's exactly where Quagmire follows Lois. Episode 6, Boston Stewie. Stewie finds out he has a long-lost half-brother, courtesy of an old egg donation from Lois. Meanwhile, Chris and Meg gain a bit of social media fame. My best cutaway was Chris shows Stewie his Jack-in-the-Box. My best moment was Boston Stewie beating people up, specifically Peter and Lois. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. Stewie's tough Boston baby brother was a bit stereotypical, but he did seem to bond with Stewie at least a bit. He also gave a few nice moments. I love the way he beat up the potential adopters for him for supporting the wrong football team. Also him going, "Bedtime is whenever the fuck you want," after beating up Lois off screen was genuinely funny. It was also nice to see him get a real family in the end, even if seemingly a dysfunctional one. The subplot was just decent, with Meg getting this brief bit of accidental social media success, only for her to end up taking advantage of Chris a bit. It was nothing we hadn't seen before between the siblings, but a subtle message about the perils of social media has some merit. If you're not careful, you can become a bit of a attention whore, and it's easier than you might think to compromise your own morals in that situation. The montages here were also decent, if a bit cheesy. However, the slideshow of politicians who apparently attended Harvard was barely even a joke. It certainly had no punchline, and I couldn't recognise any of them, except Ted Cruz. Granted, I'm not American, but still. Just a dumb joke, really. All of this kind of summed the episode up for me. It was a mixed bag through and through, which wound up being average overall. Episode 7, Snapple Decision. Lois wins a Snapple contest and a $10,000 prize. However, it soon ends up getting her and Meg into trouble. Elsewhere, Stewie and Brian have a fallout. My best cutaway here was Peter left at home with a babysitter who only has Lois's instructions. My best moment here was Lois and Meg's thrilling escape from their abductors. This one gets a 4 out of 5. This wasn't spectacular by any means, but came as a slightly pleasant surprise. The most enjoyable of the season so far, at least. Lois and Meg being paired together in a way where they weren't constantly fighting was nice to see. Sure, they got suckered in and taken captive by the two good-looking guys, but their escape was unironically a good action scene. Lois doing all the heavy lifting with the items in her purse. There was even a nice moment between the two at the end. There wasn't much to the Brian and Stewie subplot. It was a type of bust-up between them we have seen many a time before, and it was obvious they would make up in the end. Again though, they tried to end on a positive note with all the characters here, so I can at least appreciate that. I also want to touch on the brief scenes of Peter, with him trying to trick his babysitter. The fact he has one is funny by itself, but him tricking her into letting him do things Lois doesn't let him do was funny mischief. Peter being mischievous is usually fun when he's not getting carried away with it, hurting people in the process. Episode 8, Baking Sad. Meg discovers her tears produce delicious cookies. So with the help of Chris, Stewie and Brian, she starts a business. Meanwhile, Peter and his friends land a Channel 5 talk show. My best cutaway here was Regis Philbin going on a tirade from his grave. My best moment was Stewie yelling at Chris, then telling him off quietly while outside, Gordon Ramsay style. This one gets a 3 out of 5. I quite liked Meg getting her moment to shine again, even if she very much stumbled her way into it. Very much like the social media episode. This time though, her family members, minus Peter and Lois who weren't there, were all very supportive of her. Her tears making the cookie recipe taste better was weird, yet something different. The best moments came from the four making the cookies together. They seemed to be having fun doing it, so I had fun watching, especially with the Gordon Ramsay reference. But eventually she loses her ability to cry, because her life is happy now, which means in turn, no cookie business. The ending to this was slightly confusing. The reason Meg can't cry is because she's now happy in life, yet she wants to cry for the sake of her business. But a psychiatrist tells her it's better not to cry, but then she'll end up losing her business and won't be happy anymore. Add on to this the fact that the psychologist is apparently evil, and the whole building has a gas leak, which kills everyone in there, and it's all a bit of a mess. There were a few okay lines from the guys with their mediocre men's talk show, although the wives getting involved, trying to cancel their show, felt a bit forced. We never even saw the guys do anything bad. Even the things the women said they did off screen weren't particularly bad. Also, the point about men eventually running out of things to say to each other can be applied to most humans really. I don't think women are any better at small talk than men really. Maybe they can come up with more nonsense to talk about. That might be true. So overall this had some positives, but also some weird and stale plot elements. Episode 9, The Return of the King of Queens. Kevin James pays the Griffins a visit, after Peter, his last viewer, stops watching his show. My best cutaway here was Peter and Lois at a restaurant in the Florida Panhandle. My best moment overall was the ending. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This is another average episode. Kevin James didn't really do it for me, never seemed to add much, but using him to make a point about the differences between streaming content nowadays and the old cable TV stuff was interesting. I do think Peter kind of had a point with his speech at the end. Sometimes you do need silliness in your life to just laugh along to, and plenty of cliche TV sitcoms provided that release throughout the decades. Not that series on streaming networks can't do the same thing, but they do tend to be more serious and darker in their tone. You get a lot more shows like that on there than you do silly sketch comedy shows. Now, Kevin James literally starting to disappear after becoming irrelevant was a very obvious metaphor, but it got the point across. The jokes here were also decent. All the uneducated Florida folks jumping to get the food out of Lois's windpipe after they were promised they could have it if they did was funny, as was the rude exchange between the flying eagles in the cutaway. Also, despite this not technically being a fully focused Christmas episode, it kind of was, but wasn't a fully fledged one. The visuals of the snow outside were pretty good. Family Guy's wintry settings always feel quite cozy to me. Episode 10, Cabin Pressure. Peter wins a 5-night stay at his boss's cabin in Maine, so his family decide to invite all their friends to come stay. My best cutaway here was the commentators at a football game sounding unenthusiastic about having to promote Family Guy. My best moment was everyone rushing back to help Peter in a cliche way. This one gets a 3 out of 5. Episodes like this, which put a lot of the main cast together at a different location, have worked well for the show in the past, and it did here to an extent. I mean, some things brought up never went anywhere, like Lois clogging the toilet and making Peter take the blame, but Stewie and Brian out on the town in Maine was okay, and Peter criticising everyone before the fire, causing them to leave, only for them to come back for the ending, worked because the episode poked fun at itself. Of course it's all cheesy, with the "not just us" line, as the cars come over the horizon, and of course their efforts to rebuild Preston's fire-damaged home completely fail. It's still a happy ending regardless, as Preston actually hated the cottage and was glad just to get the insurance payment out of it. Again, none of this is getting too much praise, but it's competent enough to get by. The jokes are similar. I liked the moose with the canoe, same with the Bob Belcher cameo, but there were equally many which were over-explained and fell flat. Episode 11, Teacher's Heavy Pet. Lois joins Chris's school as a substitute teacher. My best cutaway was Peter ruining Chris's birthday party by becoming the piñata. Not to be outdone, the piñata became him by stealing his body. My best moment was Quagmire emerging from the wall to advise Chris on taking the photo. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was a weird episode, but at least a fully focused one. I'm actually enjoying these last 2 episodes having no B-plot. It's not like they were ever great anyway, and their absence allows for more time to be focused in one area, which hopefully, in theory, gives them more of a chance of getting it right. Obviously Lois becoming Chris's substitute is an unoriginal sitcom-y type of idea, but them adding the sexual element of a student with a teacher did make it seem more consequential. Chris was only copying his mum by lying, only he lied about having sex with the teacher to all the other students, while Lois lied to get the gig in the first place. It's somewhat understandable Chris would lie to be more popular, but him actually going further and taking a naked photo of Lois in the shower to show them all is what makes him a scumbag. Ignore what Quagmire says. Him coming out of the bathroom wall having perfectly blended in is perfect Quagmire absurdist humour. I do find it interesting how everyone is so casual about the idea of a teacher sleeping with a student. I get it from Principal Shepherd, he's a known weirdo, but everyone else? The ending was clearly non-canon, as Lois admits to sleeping with Chris, and his 22-inch penis, to keep his popular reputation alive, earning her 6 years in prison for her trouble. On one hand, this ending does make everything seem a bit pointless, but on the other, this was already an absurd episode, so something like this doesn't feel as jarring. Episode 12, Take This Job and Love It. Peter, Quagmire, Cleveland and Joe tell each other about their dream jobs. There was only one cutaway here, and it was the police chief calling Cleveland at 3 AM to pitch screenplays. My best moment here was Peter chasing Blowfella through Las Vegas. This one gets a 3 out of 5. Once again, I know I said last season I was getting real fed up with Lee's 3-parter episodes. This one showed some of the same weaknesses. It certainly fizzled out as it went on, but there were flashes of good here. Peter as the James Bond rip-off, lap band, was actually entertaining. Not only was there good visuals with the skiing scene and the Bond-esque intro sequence, the ending confrontation in Vegas had enough action to keep it engaging. The second segment was more typical filler stuff, about a character's backstory centered on a specific period of time, with nothing but cliché jokes about that time. This time it was Quagmire in the 80s, being a failed, or should I say sabotaged, dancer. The final part was okay. It was Cleveland and Joe being very opposite type of cops. Cleveland being the by-the-book guy, and Joe being this more adventurous, risk-taking guy. The ending shootout was quite tame and ended suddenly, but there was a bit of subtle foreshadowing of Carter's betrayal with the picture in his office. Overall, as anthologies go, this was a decent one. Episode 13, Lifeguard Meg. Meg earns herself a job as a lifeguard by rescuing Stewie from drowning at the ocean park. Meanwhile, Stewie and Brian gain ownership of a coffee shop. My best cutaway here was Meg being given the tight-fitting shoes in the Wizard of Oz fairy tale. My best moment overall was Meg saving Stewie from drowning. The only real good moment of the episode, because at least she was doing the right thing, and it had a bit of action to it. Probably gives away that I'm not this episode's biggest fan. I give it a 1 out of 5. I've been given a few things a pass lately with this season, but I'm all out of good graces with this one. A lot of these episodes have had that who cares if we have a functioning plot, with a beginning, middle and end. We can even retcon the whole thing basically with the ending. This one delivered the same deal, only never had the positives to make up for it. Stewie and Brian owning a coffee shop was completely pointless. The only things they got out of it were a few half-assed jabs at cancel culture and college students. Stewie hardly recognised that any of it happened after he came back at the end to do the CPR on Peter. Speaking of that, everyone mocking Meg for doing her job as a lifeguard by giving Peter CPR and saving his life after he was being an ass being there in the first place was one of the dumbest premises I've ever seen. Everyone was like, ooh, she kissed her dad on the lips. How disgusting. It's playground stuff, it really is. Makes everyone in town look both like idiots and actively malicious at the same time, which is quite impressive. Add on to that the ending where Peter makes empty promises to Meg about being better, and them just hand-waving the whole thing away, and it's simply one of the most aggressively stupid and pointless episodes ever. Episode 14, Fat Actor. Peter takes Brad Pitt's role in his latest film on account of being overweight. My best cutaway was Peter standing up to Kanye West, although maybe not about the right things. My best moment was Peter pretending to laugh at the Dangerous Curves Ahead t-shirt the cringy librarian lady was wearing. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. This was just your regular, slightly substandard episode for the most part, with not too many good moments. Only really the two I already brought up as my favourite moment and cutaway. I don't have anything to say about anything apart from the ending. That was clearly the crux of everything, right? Peter got his acting job despite being terrible simply because he was fat. so they used that to frame their argument about inclusivity and representation and whether actors should be picked based on their background or how they look. This show of course knows all about that, with the Cleveland voice actor replacement, but to be fair to them, that was Mike Henry stepping down voluntarily. The show can't do anything if an actor makes that decision themselves. I tend to mostly agree with the message here. I do think someone's skills should be the main reason they get the job, especially if it's a voice acting role. But then again, I'm not a massive one for diversity's sake. I know many people are though, and they have their reasons for that. That's fine. I would say if you're portraying a character on screen though, it helps to look something like that character for obvious reasons. So common sense should be applied. I know that's a big ask nowadays, but we can all dream, right? Regardless of the ending though, this episode was not entertaining enough for me to enjoy as an overall package. Episode 15, Faith No More. Brian wishes that Christianity would disappear and uses Stewie's time machine to prevent it from ever existing. There was only one cutaway here, and it was pretty good. It was Joseph and Mary on Maury to determine the real father of the baby. My best moment was God beating up Brian and Stewie. This season finale gets a disappointing 2 out of 5. Okay, let's just get the most important thing straight. Brian's actions in this episode. He meets a nice vet lady and asks her out, which she accepts. Only she wants to go and see a Christian rock band because she's a Christian. If he wasn't a fan of that, Brian could have simply said no thanks, right there and then. But instead he of course had to lie to her about being Christian for the sole purpose of trying to have sex with her after the very first date. When she declines that, it apparently means not only her, but the whole religion of Christianity is in the wrong. Okay, you're gonna have to explain that one to me, Brian. Things progress to the point where he steals Stewie's time machine and heads back to make Jesus a comedian, which stops Christianity from becoming a thing. Turns out though, this makes everyone Jewish instead in the present day. Brian is also unhappy about that, so he goes back in time again trying to stop that religion, which also backfires. Things end with God coming to the present to bully Brian and Stewie into accepting Christianity. Honestly, that was the best bit here, just because Brian getting roughed up is somewhat enjoyable by itself. Still though, this wasn't a fun watch overall, simply because Brian's tired arguments against religion is such a bore. Look, it's fine if you're not religious. There are many valid criticisms you can make about organised religion, and I'm not a fan of having blind faith about anything. Brian always has to make the most over-the-top, unnuanced arguments though, such as all the evil in the world is due to religion. Without it, everyone would get along fine. Or science has all of the answers, so we should follow that, almost like a religion. I would say these arguments are kind of doing a disservice to all the atheists out there, but then again, many of them do make these kinds of arguments. From my experience at least, it's actually hard to have any kind of imaginative, open-minded conversation, not even a debate, but a conversation, with many atheists, maybe even the majority of them. A lot of them are just as dogmatic as religious people, just in a different way. Honestly, Brian is basically the atheism subreddit, condensed into a cartoon character. So yes, this was a bit of a miss to sign off the season. Alright you guys, here is the Season 22 summary. The overall average score was a pretty bad, frankly, 2.6. My bottom 5 episodes were Fertilized Meg at 5, Faith No More at 4, Old World Harm at 3, A Stache from the Past at 2, and Lifeguard Meg was the only 1 out of 5. I debated even putting up a top 5, because there was but one 4-rated episode, the rest were mediocre 3s. But I did the work, and found my 4 favourite 3-rated episodes. They were Teacher's Heavy Pet at 5, Take This Job and Love It at 4, Cabin Pressure at 3, Baby It's Cold Inside at 2, and Snapple Decision is indeed the only 4-rated episode, so is the best. So yes, the rating tips you off to the fact that I dislike this season. The past few have been decent, but this was a downgrade in pretty much every aspect. Not quite as funny to me, not as many interesting character moments, and especially the plots, which feel lacking in juice. So many stories here feel like either rip-offs of what came before, or the concept is so paper-thin to begin with that it never should have been a story in the first place. This is laid bare by how many 2s and 3s there were. All this meant that, despite being a shorter season, this still felt like a slog to get through. It honestly dampens my mood on the show again. Thankfully I am almost caught up anyway, but maybe I will take a little break and do 2 South Park seasons in a row or something before getting back to this one. I hope you guys are all there regardless of what I do. For now though, thank you all very much for watching and take care.